Our candles today, I've got them all lit up there. Kind of looks like an orange candle, but it's actually a pink candle, a subtle pink candle. I kind of
It's
like
a lot of
that color.
imagination.
What?
I said that's a lot of imagination, Jim.
Well, let me just show you what it actually looked like so you can see.
Okay.
Oops, why is it on that?
That wasn't a candle at all.
No, I need to do this. Where is it? Oh, there it is. So you can see it's pink back there. Right
Oh
there.
yeah.
Okay. So
Very pretty.
it's a, and I like that color. Not the bright neon pink, but the pink that literally is everywhere. You can find it on almost every face at some place or another, right? You can find it as accents all over your house.
In the sky.
In the sky. Right. It's just there on a regular basis. Yep. Infusing just about anything. And sometimes it's the transition between this bright color and that bright color. Sometimes it's little subtleties. Sometimes it's accents, but it's just present. And that's what I want love to be. Sometimes we turn it into that which is, the fiery fire of falling in love type of thing. But I like better that where it's just present between us.
Yeah.
I think that's the better kind of love. So that's what we're lighting a candle for today. And that's what we're trying to discover in the midst of this season. And this year, which hasn't always been easy to find love, has it? Distance from those who we know we love. So there's questioning there, not questioning necessarily of the people, but questioning of, well, if I can't do this, where's the love at? All those traditions that we typically have done. But also questions in huge ways between the rivalries between us, right? And the struggles of this side versus that side, not just in politics, but in our social dynamics, the racial issues that have come up. All of those have made us have to question love. So I'm glad we got to this poem and this day. So it's called Love's Exquisite Freedom. And truthfully, I could just read that title and be satisfied. But the poem is good too. We, unaccustomed to courage, exiles from delight, live coiled in shells of loneliness until love leaves its high holy temple and comes into our sight to liberate us into life. Love arrives, and in its train come ecstasies, old memories of pleasure, ancient histories of pain. Yet if we are bold, love strikes away the chains of fear from our souls. We are weaned from our timidity. In the flush of love's light, we dare be brave, and suddenly we see that love costs all we are and will ever be. Yet it is only love which sets us free. And those last two lines are just exquisite, aren't they? Love costs all we are and will ever be, yet it is only love which sets us free. So I want you to think about, first of all, the ones that you have loved easily and well, and that have loved you wonderfully. And what did you learn from them? How did you discover love because of them?
I think my earliest memory of unconditional love were my grandmothers. I come from a chaotic, violent, abusive childhood, but I spent one weekend with one grandmother, the next weekend with the other grandmother, and they were my safe havens. And it was a connection with history, with my personal history. And it was just like my grandmother Ruby introduced me to these little Bible stories, to Jesus. My family didn't go to church, my grandmother Ruby did, and she's the first one that took me to Vacation Bible School, but she introduced me to Jesus, and that just changed who I was. It's like I didn't see Jesus as the Son of God, still don't, but as someone who was just such a perfect, loving presence in my life, that's guided me through most of my life, I guess. I wasn't churched, but I learned about Jesus through her.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
One of the things that's best about grandparents is they don't have to set the rules most of the time, like our parents do, right? And so they can be more in just the love business. How about the rest of you?
It got me thinking about my grandparents. Actually, both of my grandfathers died before I was born. My mother's mother was about 10 years older than my dad's mother, and she was not I think she was a loving person. It's just that she wasn't expressive.
Mm-hmm.
And she was quite elderly. My mom was older when she got married, and she had me. I think she was 38 when she had me. And so I just didn't really know her. And then that grandmother died. The other grandmother, my mom's mom, was just a sweet lady, and she lived on West 57th Street in New York City, Manhattan.
Yeah.
And I lived in New Jersey, sort of South Jersey. It's lots of green down there, and suburban near Philadelphia. But and she died when I was 10. But when I was younger, she would have me come up and stay with her in her apartment for a week in the summertime. And my brother wasn't going to be there. My brother had a separate week. And so for 1 week, this incredible grandmother took good care of me and loved me. And
Yeah, she was all yours.
she was all mine, and I adored her. And man, that was so hard when she became ill and died. I was probably 8 or 9 when she became ill, when she died when I was 10. And it was just, but the joy of being with her for that week was so special.
Yeah. One of the things I love about grandparents is they show us, my 2 grandmothers, for example, were very, very different. The one grandmother was this short little imp of a woman that just was the epitome of like wrap you in a ball of love. And the other was not. The other was a pioneer woman. And she, tended like a quarter acre of garden every year, and rough and tumble, and liked fishing, and completely different, but they both loved me in wonderful and amazing ways.
Yeah.
Right? How about the rest of you?
Please mute yourself.
How have you discovered love? Who helped you discover love?
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Diane.
Yeah, I think if we're talking about unconditional love too, which is what I would like to talk about. Certainly from my dad and my grandmother on my mother's side, that I spent 2 weeks with every summer, and it was just delightful. I would go to church with her sometimes, but it was a very conservative, hot, long service that I didn't necessarily enjoy, but enjoyed being with her.
Mm-hmm.
And she also had 2 sons, my uncles there, who were so much fun. Her household was one of fun and laughter. So, and lively, very lively, because lots of people came through it. Various relatives, various friends, neighbors, whoever wanted to come through the house. So it was a wonderful setting for conviviality, for reaching out to people, reaching in, and my grandmother was at the heart of it.
Yeah.
And she loved me unconditionally.
And we will get to unconditional love, but oftentimes we don't experience that growing up. We experience people who wonderfully love us, but you can see that there's conditions on it. My Granny May, the frontiers woman that I told you about, she was not quite unconditional. You know, she thought, you better work, right? You better do this. You better, she had opinions about things. When I was 13, I went down and lived there. It was up in the mountains of Arizona, eastern Arizona. And this is the year that I decided I was growing my hair out. Granny May was not a long hair on a guy type of girl, right? And so she decided that Uncle John was going to cut my hair.
Oh, no.
She stopped it midway because she saw that this grandchild of hers needed that hair more than she needed her opinion. And so she moved from that conditional love, which we all live in most of our lives, to saying, in this case, I'll choose something different. And it was one of my best loving, learning about love moments in my life, because that was not what Nan would do normally. How about the rest of you? Where did you learn love?
Well, for me, there was, I can't pinpoint any particular one because I really felt so much. Of course, my parents and lots of aunts and uncles, and they were always so, not just welcoming, but gathering, I could say, you know, the type, they would gather one up either emotionally or physically a lot. And I always looked so much forward to being with them, either traveling to where they lived or when they came to our house for, say, Thanksgiving or Christmas.
Yeah.
So forth. There were just so many, I can't pinpoint a single one or a single event.
Which, John, I think that's why we struggle so much in this year, where we can't get together for Thanksgiving. We can't get together in the same way for Christmas. We can't, all those things where we have had some of those traditions of meeting and seeing, even crazy Uncle Earl, who, you know, the ones that are kind of harder to love. Still, that coming together is an important element, and we're missing that this year a lot.
Well, I agree with you, but I wanted to insert too that actually, in many ways, because of the difficulty of the year, the pandemic and the election turmoil and so forth, I have felt stronger love for those whom I love.
Yeah, good.
They really come into focus. They are present, and makes me think that outside of times like these have been, I perhaps haven't been as cognizant of receiving that as I could be. So there's this odd, converse experience there in a way. I think so much of old friends, and having got a Christmas card just yesterday from one of my oldest friends from 3rd grade, and he's funny and I love him. And but you know, during the year, I don't think about him very often.
Oh.
There are plenty of other things to think about.
But as you say that, I think about in this poem, in the second stanza, where it says, love arrives, and in its train come ecstasies, old memories of pleasure, like a friend who comes back, and also ancient histories of pain, which I kind of love that dichotomy, the juxtaposition of those two things, that we have that pleasure, but it also reminds us that before I used to have this pain, but it's ancient because of, that it's somehow drawn me beyond just that pain. And that love has taught us a different way, better way. And uncles can be painful in more than one way. but they can also, you know, there's been more than one of us rescued by an uncle when dad wasn't enough, or by an aunt when mom was the biggest pain we had. Right?
Obstruction to life and liberty and pursuit.
Absolutely. I think our other mothers and fathers are really important in our
Oh,
life.
yeah. Oh, my, yes. I was just thinking about an uncle or a cousin. I'm not quite sure what the relationship. Well, see, he was married to my mom's sister who died before I was born. But Elmer was his name.
Yes.
And he lived a little bit, maybe 100 miles away from where we did, but he would come and visit often. And I can remember he just loved to see what I was doing, whatever that was. He wanted to be a participant, maybe not a participant, but maybe at least an observer, and to kind of they had no children. She died, she had had heart disease, and she died of heart disease. She never was able to have a child. And she died when my mom was pregnant with me. And so Elmer would come, and he would tease me, but he was present there. And my dad was too, but it was a different kind of relationship. And I just appreciated him. I also was very embarrassed by him because I was becoming a teenager. I can remember vividly.
Absolutely.
He came, I went to dance class, and it was boys and girls. I don't know if you guys did that kind of thing in the town where I grew up. That was a very important part of life. And and it had to be even number of boys and girls. And so they, you know, and I was probably 12 or something like that. Man, and it was in this place where they had like a balcony, and Elmer would be up in that balcony, and I was like, oh, I am so embarrassed.
But uncles can be really good at doing that embarrassing thing.
Yeah,
Right?
and you just know it comes from so much love and appreciation.
Yeah,
you know,
they take that on as a role, don't they?
Yeah.
Your dad embarrassed you.
What's really interesting for Joni and I is our family structures are very, very, very different. Joni doesn't have any kids of her own, but helped me with my two boys. In her whole family, there were 3 nieces and nephews, not including my boys, on her side of the family. And so very finite family. There's not a family in my side of the family besides my own that doesn't have more than 3 kids. Right? So just very different. And yet, so she's very, very involved in every single one of her nieces and nephews' lives in ways that I can't be on my side of the family. But we all take on different roles because of that, those dynamics that bring us there. One of our other readings was called Love 3 by George Herbert. And it said like this: love bade me welcome, yet my soul drew back, guilty of dust and sin. How many have sometimes felt that type of dynamic that
Yes.
you can't enter into it if you have dust and sin on your soul? And yet it says this: but quick-eyed love, observing me grow slack from my first interest in, drew nearer to me, sweetly questioning if I lacked anything. What told you? How did you learn that you weren't worthy of love? That this wasn't a relationship you could enter into? And many times we reinforce that into each other, right? We've all had a boyfriend or a girlfriend probably who rejected us at some point or another. But then who was it that helped to open that door and say, no, that's not the truth about you? So first of all, deal with the rejection thing. Where did you learn hesitancy around love? What taught you to be careful and question yourself and all of that?
Childhood abuse.
Childhood abuse does that. Because those people who maybe do love you even, but that do wrong in the midst of that. It's a hard betrayal, isn't it?
Well, I would have to say that, you know, I guess the nemesis and challenge was always my mom, because there were always conditions which sometimes I did not meet. And I was always struggling to be better, to be best, to try to iron that out and get back into her good graces. But lo and behold, it would work for a little while, but I would always be holding my breath because inevitably I would screw up, and then it would be right back to where it was before. And my mother had a memory like an elephant. She did happen to be a Republican. I don't know that that's an accident necessarily. I have a wry sense of humor, and I always like to slip things in. So it's part of what's allowed me to function in life. And to this day, I think maybe it's been other people. I'm thinking about when you had the question before that I had two aunts, one on my mom's side and one on my dad's side. And they weren't perfect women, but they were themselves, and they were just down to earth and basically loving good women in their own right, and kind. And then I really would have to commend and also acknowledge my older sister, who is fortunately still on the planet, and she is 87. She's a bit older than I. And my sister has...
Much older.
Huh?
Much.
Yes, 13 years to be exact. I'm 74 and proud of it. But pushing towards 75, and she will be 88 a day after I turn 75 in February. But anyway, that's an aside. But you want to know what the dates? It's the 16th. Should you want to remember it?
February 16th?
Yes. She couldn't quite squeeze me out for Valentine's Day, but that's okay. I wanted my own day. So my sister has, I think, been a leveling force because we've been able to talk a lot of the time, and she's been able to provide much clarity and another window on my life, and also been a source of I'm proud of her. I appreciate her. She's my friend and my sister, and she sees things very clearly, and I know that that's really helped me along the way. So.
I think there's a lot of suffering in this world because of disconnectedness. It's like in our society, it's like there's such rugged individualism, and everybody's like, you know, if someone's suffering, like I know there's some societies where if there's someone suffering, and like I was reading about this thing in Nairobi, there's a village where if someone's suffering, the whole village comes together and they want to hear the truth from that person, why they're suffering. They tell, like, it could be something, it probably isn't going to be a regal thing. It could be jealousy. It could be, anger. It can be things that they're not proud of. But if they don't speak their truth and get that out there, and then the rest of the village brings out their troubles. And then they dance and sing and drum to heal them all. And it's through a community they heal themselves. And I just think about a lot, it makes me think a lot about our society. And it's like, if someone's suffering, it's their problem and
Mhm.
they're supposed to fix it. They're supposed to take care of it. They have to heal themselves. And we don't offer good, decent, Diane knows this, we don't offer decent mental health at all in this country.
No.
And people are kind of, if you're suffering, it's like you're isolated more. And I think that's just tragic because, and I think that's the reason why we're having so much division in our country today, is that there's a lot of people out there suffering deeply. And we don't reach out to each other to help each other. Instead, it's like you're supposed to lift yourself up, get yourself out of it.
Yeah.
And I don't know, sorry, it's just not, I've been thinking about that a lot recently. And it's like, to me, it's just kind of tragic how our society, I would like to see, and I don't know how it would happen, but I would really like to see some kind of a revolution where it's in our society, where it's like, we take care of each other better.
The difficulty of doing that, of course, Judy, is that we would have to admit you into me, right? I would have to take you inside of myself and say, you're part of me, and claim you as the community. And that's what, in this poem that I started out with, love keeps doing, is it keeps pulling this person into community. And that's hard for us sometimes. How many have at least one person in the world right now that you don't really like having in your community, right? Somebody that just makes that community more challenging, more difficult. And it would be really nice if they would go somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
And at least part of what those African native traditions are saying is, no, we are us. You are me and I am you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly. And it's an African proverb.
Yeah.
I
There's a
see
word
me
for
in
it.
you and you see me. And
Uh-huh.
anyway, I'm not really good at those quoting things, but
Yeah.
it's something like that. It's along those lines.
There's a word for it. It's called Ubuntu.
Yes, that's exactly it. That's a word I
Yeah.
discovered that yesterday, Jim. That's exactly what
Yeah.
it is.
So if you look up that word, it's a wonderful word, and it's essentially me seeing the us all the time.
Yeah.
And me seeing me as part of the us. And I love some of, like what you talked about, that telling of, I don't punish you. We somehow sit in a place where we all heal, because
Mhm.
whatever I am is part of what wounded you, that caused you to do what you are. And taking that more holistic look at it. But in our world, we're real good at punishing the wrong person, right? And sending them off to jail and never thinking about them again. And so punishment has become our mode rather than relationship.
You must have read exactly what I read, because that's exactly the words that were going on there. And I have people that I have to set boundaries with that I don't want in my life.
That's right.
There are people who are toxic to me, but that's not the same. Like, I like the soul connection thing we have going on Zoom now. That's been really, really important to me, because we tell our deepest truths to each other. And I don't, it's like I can tell you all, I can tell them how my heart's aching today, or what, I'm having a lot of physical pain today, or I'm going through something really horrible, or how something I've discovered that's brought me great joy, or what I'm learning about something. And, my life is fairly isolated due to things, some that are not within my control. And I think too, we have to learn to forgive ourselves first. We have to have that self-compassion and self-love before we can offer it to others. And that's something I would have to work hard at, because guilt and blame, shame is just, it's like, okay, what am I doing? It's like, okay, I have this illness. There must be something wrong with me. Everybody else is doing well.
Yeah.
It's like, there's something wrong with me because I'm having this happen to me. And it's like, it's hard to work through that and go and just say, it's okay, Judy. You're enough. You're doing okay. You're doing your best. And you're enough. And I'll probably tomorrow go, why did you share all that, Judy? Especially your stories. I mean, everybody, who knows, going to listen to this and stuff. But part of me is like, if we don't share our struggles with our stories are so important to each other that if we don't share those, then we'll never know each other. I mean, it's how you make connections is sharing your story. So I'm like, I decided recently to go out on a limb on these Zoom calls and just tell my truth.
Yeah. One of the best things about St. Francis is, well, I guess you could say there's not really the filters that there are at other churches, right? People
Right.
speak their truths honestly and openly. And I think that's an amazing thing, because there's a bunch of places where you act in a certain way. You put on the mask. And that kind of pseudo community doesn't really bring us deeply into each other. And honesty does.
I haven't taken the time to share yet, but I'm still thinking of all the different questions we've been asked. I came from what I always say is one of the rare functional families. So I was loved by both parents and didn't have a struggle with my childhood. My brothers were in high school when I was born, so I didn't really have brothers at home. They had already graduated before I had any memory of them living there. When you asked about rejection, I didn't have any thoughts of that in my neighborhood or in my school or anything when I was raised. But most of you know that I'm a physician, but I don't think very many people know that I quit medical school for 6 years and then went back. And I quit. I had been accepted and I quit as a second-year student. I was already married, but Jim and I didn't have kids at the time. He was in med school. And I was already a second-year student and doing well, not any challenge, but I didn't feel like it was an environment that wanted me. In your first 2 years of med school, you're mostly dealing with PhDs who are PhDs in anatomy and physiology and biochemistry. And they think that, that's where the smart people go. And it's the dumb people that go to get their MDs. And so they don't treat you, in those days, they didn't treat you very respectfully. They just was an obligation to teach the med students where they really wanted to be in their lab and doing research or working with their PhD candidates. And I just got really tired of it.
Real
And I
student.
thought, I don't need to do this. My husband's going to be a doctor. I can, pursue other areas. And I dropped out of med school, and I actually didn't even have my undergrad degree yet. So I got that and got a master's in microbiology. And then we were in New Orleans for a year, and I got a master's in public health at Tulane. And then we were in Alaska for 3 years, and I'd had a couple of kids by then. And then we were about to go back to Ann Arbor because Jim had only done his internship before he had to put those years in the public health service, because it was Vietnam days and all doctors had to serve. And he chose the Indian Health Service, so because he didn't believe in the Vietnam War. Neither of us did, even though my brother died in Vietnam as a career Army officer. But anyway, so we were thinking about in our last year in Alaska, and Jim had been accepted into residency training back in Ann Arbor. And so I was thinking, maybe I'll go back to school. And my thinking was to get a doctorate in public health. And one evening, Jim sort of looked at me, said, why don't you go back to
Oh, oh dear.
Frozen.
something
Uh-oh.
useful? And so I cried and, was just what didn't know how to deal with that question. And then the next morning, I knew that he was right, and that's what I needed to do. So I look at that as one of the most loving things that he did for me, is to encourage me to rethink the MD side and go back to medical school. And so, and by then we had a couple of kids and foster kids and an adopted son, and I mean, all this other stuff. But yes, I went back to Michigan, and they allowed me to start even though they changed the curriculum in those years, because I'd had 2 master's degrees and was smart, they let me start back in as a second-year student,
Nice.
even though passing part 1 of the boards, when you had to have all that first year anatomy and physiology knowledge, was a challenge. But I did end up going back to med school and getting my MD. So it was rejection and then loving care on the part of my husband.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, thank you.
I kept coming back to the first line of the poem as you were speaking, that it said, we unaccustomed to courage. And at least part of what Jim did for you is he said, have courage in this moment to do the
That's true.
real thing.
But like I say, the rejection, not a single faculty member in the
Yeah.
medical school, even though I was on scholarship and doing well, encouraged me to stay.
Sure.
In those
Because-
days, women didn't do medicine, and they just assumed I was pregnant and, didn't want to be
Or
a
that
doctor.
you would become pregnant and.
Whatever, but I
Yeah.
mean, they just, nobody encouraged me to stay. And I mean, that was rejection.
Yeah, that's really hard.
I was very fortunate. When I went to law school, there were very few women law students, like
Same.
19 out of 200.
Yep.
And second year law school, I got pregnant.
Mhm.
And I had already had a lot of miscarriages, and that's why I ended up going to law school, because I figured I would never have kids. I got pregnant and I kept not having a miscarriage and not having a miscarriage. And then Jennifer was born in the middle of law school. And they were so wonderful. Because of the Vietnam War, they had created an exception for male students who were drafted to go to the war. And they said that if they completed half of a semester, they would get credit for it, and they could show that they would have been successful in completing it. The school gave them credit for that time, and they could return and pick up where they left off. So they did the same for me.
Mm.
Jennifer was born one day past half of that second semester of second year.
Wow.
And it was wonderful. I had to do all this writing stuff, which I hated. But anyway, but they allowed me to come back, and I did a summer class, and I took her to school with me. She'd lay on the floor in a little bundle thing, and she was nursing. And so, and I went and I took the Scenes, Estates, and Trusts from the only woman professor at law school, and we had a wonderful time. And so Jennifer went to law school as a 2-month-old baby, 3-month-old baby. And the funny thing was, she rejected law forever in her life until suddenly she was living in London and being a CPA and doing all these things there, and said, nah, I got to go back and go to law school. So she came to Tucson and went to law school.
Interesting. Interesting.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, I'd just like to tie in with Kay's comment, because I had a very low time in my life when I had had a series of jobs that were not a self-esteem building. And I decided, after we had moved here, and I decided I wanted to go back to get my master's degree in counseling, but kept putting that off, well, maybe I need to do something else before. And John took hold of it at that time. And because I was saying, well, they require finish all this paperwork by this particular date, and I get it all done and all the requirements to complete the paperwork in on time. And he said, doesn't matter. All we do is just take it in and give it to them, and that shows that it's the beginning. And that was really important, because it didn't all have to be completed perfectly. All it had to do was to be being begun. And I have to really give John credit for not only supporting me in that, but pushing me at just
Nice.
the right time.
Nice.
And when I went back to graduate school and counseling, I felt like I'd come home. So it was exactly the right place to be.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
Because the interesting thing about love, Diane, is love is not just a let me hold you in my arms type of thing. It's how do I love you enough to empower you to go and do something,
Right.
right? In the poem, Maya Angelou says, yet if we are bold, love strikes away the chains of fears from our soul. So that, you know, we have to still do all that work, but somehow that love empowers us enough to be able to get past whatever's in our way. So thank you for being loved by that guy behind you.
And sometimes there's little miracles in life. I know when I got on disability because I was having really bad health. I was having severe health problems. And I decided I wanted to go to the U of A and take one class because I wanted to study child abuse more.
Study what?
That's always been my passion. And the professor called me the next day and she said, Judy, we just got a grant certified last night. If you will take 3 classes, we'll pay your tuition and give you a stipend every month.
Oh,
Oh,
wow.
And I was like, so I was married then, and we talked about it, and I'm like, even if I get sick and can't complete, I have nothing to lose to try.
Right.
So I went through 2 years of master's program, got my master's, and it was like, wow, I did it. So it's like the universe just kind of opened up.
Fundamentally, part of why it opened up, Judy, is because somebody else struck down some of the chains that could have kept you there, right? Put some program in place, did something to make it so that you were able to discover that way, right? They can't do the work for you, but we, the community around you, can try to figure out how to ease some of the obstacles, right? Empower some of the ways that you need to be empowered. And we forget that that's a very important function of love, is that somehow we have to love maybe people we don't even know enough to be able to strike away those fears, those obstacles.
yeah.
Go ahead.
Well,
Kat.
I'm thinking about everybody's stories, and I'm struck by how many of us women have really had a challenge to get where they really wanted and needed to be. And I had various jobs, and I had partially completed college, and then I, was having my kids and all that good stuff. And I actually got fired from a job at, let's see, it's not the same kind of bank anymore. That's how long ago it was. I don't think I really did anything wrong, but something didn't come out right and they couldn't figure it out and I couldn't figure it out. So I moved on, and I was pretty chagrined because it was right around the holidays. It was around Thanksgiving time. And I remember talking with my parents who lived in Green Valley at the time, and I don't even know how the conversation came about, but I thought about going back to school myself, and I looked into it, and things happened quickly. And so I started the U of A in the spring of 1981. And my parents gave me a loan, and then I, had some other, student loan, but they really were a force for good. And I want to acknowledge that they saw that, it was kind of getting to be time. And so I finished my bachelor's degree in 1982 after going to remedial math so I could take college algebra, I think it was. And I struggled with some of that because it had been a few years needless to say, I graduated from high school in '64, and I had some college credits too under my belt. And then I took college courses in Alaska when my kids were real small. But anyway, so I got my bachelor's degree, and then I went right into the master's program for social work, which had a Tucson component at the time. And I got my master's degree in 1984. And I don't know that my husband was all that supportive, but my parents certainly saw the need, and there was that encouragement. And then I think just inside me was this yearning and drive, and knowing that I had always been a social worker in my heart, even when I was a kid, and that I really needed to make it legitimate. And I've never been sorry that I did it, even though it was
It's hard work.
a mighty effort.
Sure. But Catherine, what you're speaking of is the messages that were spoke to women that are older than me pretty much said there's certain jobs that you can go into. And it wasn't very many that were the acceptable spaces. And isn't it great that in those decades as we've gone on, much of that has disappeared? And part of it is because of pioneer women like you guys.
Yeah.
Right? Also, it's due to people who said, even though they, you know, like my mom got married pretty early, had 9 kids. She got her degree after I got my degree, about 5 years after I got my degree. She was roughly my age now when she finally finished her bachelor's degree.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Because she lived the story that she'd been told, but had the love, had the ability to be able to say, but there's another story that you get to live as well.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what we've been doing better, especially in gender issues, is being able to say there's a bigger story than what. And that's a function of love, right?
Mhm.
Well, it
Can
was teacher, nurse, or secretary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Would
none
be.
of those are a bad choice, but if it's not the profession you feel called to,
Right, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Got to do something different.
right?
Tough. That's tough.
I
Well,
was
that's-
going to,
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to change the subject a bit. I wanted to tell a story. When you were describing love as, you know, not personal relationship love, but love from the heart. And I want to tell this one is where I was the one who loved the medical student. This was in Hawaii. And it was discovered when he was a third-year student, and this guy was a Chinese guy. He was from LA. And when he came to medical school, he had the highest MCAT. Those are the medical school medical college admission test, highest scores we'd ever seen. And of course, Asians do score higher and those things. So anyway, and his first 2 years, he did amazingly well. And then in the third year, he started having a little bit of problems, and it was discovered that one of his colleagues actually discovered that this man was a marijuana addict.
Mm.
And when I got to know him then and with counseling with him, he had been using marijuana for all through high school, all through college, and still was so smart that he got all of those amazing grades and test scores, but was an addict. He was using it all the time, every day. And it's amazing that he did that well on all of those things in my mind. But he had to go into a residential physician treatment program, which they exist. And then when he came out and was sober, clean and sober, the other faculty, I was the dean of students at the time at the medical school, but the other faculty on the student progress committee, when he came back and was on his first rotation, he was having troubles because he just had never, ever done anything as an adult sober, clean and sober. So it took him a while to learn how to study and to manage his life clean and sober. Well, they interpreted that as that he didn't really want to be a doctor. and that he
Oh.
didn't belong in medicine. And so I had to go to bat for him over and over again to allow him to stay in medical school. And he did make it through and did amazingly well once he progressed. And I still keep track of him once in a great while, and he's a pulmonary specialist and
Oh.
has never relapsed. And when his parents came to his graduation, I mean, they had his dad was a doc. They had no idea. His sister knew he was an addict, but his parents didn't. But they all were so thankful to me for going to bat for him and getting him his treatment. And again, anyone else in the medical school wanted to evict him from the medical school and drop him out. But I just knew enough about addiction and to continue to encourage this brilliant young man.
Yeah,
And so that was just one of my favorite stories.
that's
Yeah,
great. Good job.
That's that.
yeah, thank you.
Yeah, good
Yeah,
job.
absolutely good. It's that type of story that we have to become, not just, because we all
Yeah,
received
loving.
that kind of story in some way or another, where someone loved us when we were less than lovable. That's
Yes.
the Christian story. And I know you won't like this language as much, but when we use language like take away the sins of the world, essentially
That's it.
what Christianity is trying to say is you don't have to worry about that you have been or that you've done. It's what are you going to do? How can I help you to become the next thing of you? And that's what Ubuntu essentially is also. It's us taking responsibility for each other so that we empower each other.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I have a question because I'm still thinking about the rejection part and our personal stories with that. And Judy Robinson, you have been the quietest one of our whole group today.
Yeah.
Do you have any stories you want to share?
You're
You're
muted.
still muted, Judy.
that's
I think
what,
she doesn't want to share.
Oh, that's because my family's moving around and talking to me and so on. So
Oh,
you didn't need to hear all those stories. Yeah, I've been trying to remember. I don't know whether I just purposely don't remember being rejected or whether it just didn't happen.
Okay.
I never quite fit my mom's image of who she thought she was going to have for a daughter. But I was so much my dad's kid that it sort of didn't matter.
yeah.
Because I would go with him on plumbing jobs. And, I just hung out with my dad and nothing else really seemed to matter when I was really young. And that carried over. I was thinking that my first sense of being sort of rejected was when I became adolescent. And for whatever reason, and we never talked about it, my dad and I tended to separate because we'd always been cuddly and hugging and all that kind of thing. And I think it became kind of taboo for him and probably for me too. And so we didn't have quite that connection. And it came back as I was an adult. But before that time, one of the loving things he did that I didn't realize at the time was he was afraid someone was going to accost me for some reason.
Oh, interesting.
He taught me very specifically about a knee to the groin.
Yes.
This
All right, Dad.
is what you do, and you don't back off, and you don't hesitate, and you don't withdraw your power. This is what you do. And I was sort of mystified at the time, but I also then never experienced some of the predatory sexual experiences that other women my age did. And I think it may be because I had that internal knowledge
Mhm.
that I sort of emanated. Don't mess with me because I know what to do. And I don't know that that's true, but it may be one of the more loving things, and he was always loving with me. That him teaching me that self-defense thing
Mhm.
just had ramifications that I was not aware of until much, much later. And,
But I
and in
can-
fact, not until recently when the Me Too thing was happening. And I thought, where was I during all of that? Either I was not active or something else was going on. And then I realized, and I just carried myself in such a way that people didn't want to mess with me.
They didn't want to mess with you. They were smart.
But
Well, but you know,
what I'd been thinking about was also how not tricky, but sort of miraculous it is to find the ways that other people feel loved.
Mhm.
You know, many of you know, I used to go around at church meetings rubbing shoulders.
Right.
And
Yeah.
every once in a while I'd reach somebody who would cringe at the touch, and it was not a loving experience for them. And I had to kind of remember who those people were and not attack them from
Yeah,
behind
yeah.
what I was doing. And you know, my way of loving somebody may not be their experience. I mean, they may experience something entirely different from what I'm trying to explain or, you know, trying to give out. So there's a lot of listening that has to happen and a lot of observation.
Yeah.
But Judy, the profession you come from attests to that. If you're a teacher, you don't have 25 kids who walk through the door that you love them all perfectly and easily and well. But you have to figure out how to communicate to each one, don't you?
Yep.
And essentially give them loving experience, even though this is not your favorite. But that's what we all have to do, isn't it? It's whether or not we do the listening to see that this touch, which I think is loving, isn't loving this for this person.
Yeah.
This thing that I think will help them perfectly realize that maybe it's not. And you have to hear them.
And there have been times in my life where I thought I was loving somebody and I didn't find out until way later that I was just irritating the hell out of them.
Yeah.
It was not experienced the way I intended it to at all.
Yeah. But that's part of loving. It's the listening, the being present enough to hear that.
Yeah.
And then drawing from all the different ways that uncles and aunts and grandparents and friends and neighbors loved you, each of them loving you differently,
Yeah.
but each one adding to your definition of unconditional love. 'Cause
Exactly.
I'm gonna guess that you had no one in your life that loved you unconditionally, but together maybe they gave you an image of what unconditional love meant. That Uncle Joey loved you in this area, where Aunt Martha loved you in a different way. And together you got the image of what love could be, somehow or another. I want to end by telling you one of my favorite benedictions. I don't use it all the time, but I think about it often. It says this: love as you have been loved. Somehow or another, you learned love, didn't you? Somehow, in a lot of different ways, you learned love.
Mhm.
And now go and love in whatever way is appropriate and needed at this moment with this person in this situation. Go and love as you have been loved. Thank you for our time together.
Jim,
All right. For some of you, I'll see you tonight at the service, and others of you that I'll see you on Sunday.
Namaste.
Thank you.
Love and hugs to
Thank
all of you.
you.
Thank
Yes.
So let us know what the next book is going to be.
I'm working on that.
Okay.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
I just want to say I have some really amazing, wonderful news that I
Oh,
got
good.
this morning, and it came from Allison, my daughter, who's an emergency room physician in Boise, that she is scheduled for vaccine Friday morning at 9:30.
Okay.
Oh, wonderful.
Nice.
One of my doctors in Philadelphia is also on schedule. My daughter, my doctor daughter in Philly is also getting her vaccine on Friday.
All
Nice.
right, it's a big day for us, isn't
Good day.
it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good day. Thank you, my
Yeah.
friends. Take care.
Okay, bye.